One thing that I think is really helpful for our listeners here is that you provide a very clear picture about how neuroscience has shifted from this metaphor of the brain as a computer to the prediction machine. So can you give our listeners this sense of the top-down predictions meeting bottom-up sensory perception and error corrections that construct our sense of reality?
Absolutely. When we think about the brain, when neuroscientists or academics have thought about the brain, we always have to reach for a metaphor of some sort. And this is, of course, how people think in general when faced with something they don't quite understand. The brain as a computer metaphor has been very dominant for a very long time, and it's still there to some extent in most of psychology and neuroscience. And it's not entirely wrong. There is an interesting way to think about the brain as taking in some information, signals enter the senses, stuff happens inside, and we do stuff. We move our limbs, we move our mouths to make sounds when we speak. There's this input to output process, which is in a way a little bit like what a computer does too. And there are things like memory that computers have, and we have a form of memory. But taking this metaphor too far is very dangerous. If we think of the brain as literally like a computer, with the body relegated to the meat robot that moves the brain computer from one meeting to another, and that understanding the mind is simply a matter of figuring out what program the wetware of the brain is running, then I think we get radically misled. There are very, very many differences between biological brains and silicon computers. Memory, for instance, just to take one example. Memory in a computer, you store a file, and then when you retrieve it, it's the same file. At least it should be if your computer is working properly. But human memory isn't like that at all. Every time you remember something, you recreate it, you regenerate it, and it becomes, if anything, slightly less accurate the more often you recall it. That's just one way in which functionally the brain and the computer are different. Now,
which is quite reassuring, I think.
It's very reassuring. I don't like to think of my brain as this as this information processing device. It makes it less embodied. It makes it less real in some way. And it also, at least, there's one other central idea in this metaphor of the brain as a computer, which is that then consciousness becomes something that you can simulate on a computer and give rise to consciousness by simulating. So for some things, this is true, right? If you program a computer to play chess, it's actually playing chess. Computer that plays chess. But if you simulate a weather system on a computer, say you're into forecasting storms, something like that, you have a very fast computer, you simulate in great detail how a hurricane develops. Now, it will never get wet or windy inside the computer. It's always only going to be a simulation, however accurate, however detailed it is. And so if you take the brain as a computer metaphor too far, then you lose the possibility that consciousness might be more like the weather than like chess. It might not be something that can be simulated in all its detail. You might actually depend on the real stuff that's inside our skulls. And that's for me one of the big questions. I don't have an answer to that question, but I don't want to assume an answer one way or the other by taking a metaphor too far.